Imagine this. You're sitting in a dental surgery in Beverly Hills. It is a Tuesday afternoon. The waiting room is marble. The receptionist is wearing a headset, and the dentist is about to place a ceramic crown into the mouth of someone worth 9 figures. That crown weighs less than a gram. It cost the patient around $2,000, and it was manufactured in a valley so small, so remote, and so geographically irrelevant that most Europeans could not find it on a map. If you look at official data, this country has almost no natural resources, no oil, no coastline, a population smaller than a mid-sized American suburb. By every conventional measure, it should be an economic footnote. So how does it generate one of the highest GDPs per capita on the planet? Everyone thinks they know the answer. You're probably already saying it. Offshore banking, tax haven, shell companies, and sure, the phantom corporations played a role, but the real story is far stranger and far more physical than that. We're going to look at how a single ceramics factory quietly cornered the global supply of false teeth, how that monopoly funded an entire nation, and why the most boring product in the world turned out to be the most powerful. Here is how you build an empire one tooth at a time. To understand what Liechtenstein was before the money arrived, you need to erase everything you think you know about modern Europe and start from scratch. In the early 20th century, this was not a financial hub. It was not a precision manufacturing powerhouse. It was a patch of alpine farmland wedged between 2 economic giants, Switzerland and Austria, with no coastline, no railway of its own, no significant industry, and a population that would comfortably fit inside a modest football stadium. The royal family, the House of Liechtenstein, was so destitute after World War I that they were forced to sell off paintings from their private art collection just to keep the lights on. The principality had dissolved its customs union with Austria in 1919 after backing the wrong side in the war, leaving it economically marooned. There was no leverage, there was no bargaining chip, there was not even a paved road connecting the entire country until well into the 20th century. When historians describe Liechtenstein as poor during this era, they do not mean the polite kind of poor that comes with managed austerity. They mean the kind of poor where a sovereign nation has no meaningful way to generate revenue, and its ruling class is quietly liquidating centuries of inherited wealth to survive. The country had a population of roughly 10,000 people, almost all of whom were subsistence farmers. It had no army worth mentioning, no exports worth protecting, and no political clout in any room that mattered. What it did have was geography, and for most of history, that geography felt more like a curse than a gift. A tiny landlocked valley surrounded by powers with no particular interest in its well-being. The story of how this forgotten microstate became one of the wealthiest nations on Earth per capita does not begin with a bold government vision or a natural resource discovery. It begins with a dental appointment, and more specifically with the terrifying aftermath of a world war that knocked out the teeth of an entire continent. The ceramics company that would eventually change everything was not even founded in Liechtenstein. It started in Zurich in 1923 under the distinctly unglamorous name of Ramsperger and Company. It made one product: artificial teeth, ceramic prosthetics, handcrafted to mimic the look of natural enamel and fitted into the mouths of the growing population of Europeans who had lost theirs to disease, injury, and the basic indignity of 19th century dentistry. For the first decade of its existence, the company was unremarkable. Then, in 1933, it made a decision that would quietly reshape an entire nation. It moved. Specifically, it moved to Schaan, a small municipality in the Principality of Liechtenstein, where land was cheap, regulations were minimal, and the desperate local government would do almost anything to attract a real business. The move created over 100 new jobs in a country that barely had that many working adults in formal employment. Then the Second World War arrived and changed the calculus entirely. While factories across Germany, France, Italy and Austria were bombed, requisitioned or shuttered, the Liechtenstein operation kept running. Liechtenstein was neutral. It was also irrelevant enough that no one particularly wanted to blow it up. This made the company, by then renamed Ramco AG, something extraordinary. It became virtually the only functioning artificial tooth factory left in Europe. An entire continent was coming out of the war with mouths devastated by years of malnutrition, battlefield injuries, and zero access to dental care. The demand was not modest, it was civilizational. A German mechanical engineer named Dr. Adolf Schneider recognized exactly what he was looking at when he took over management of the company in 1948. In 1951, he renamed it Ivoirclar, a word he constructed from the French for ivory and bright. The name was deliberate. This was not a product company. This was a prestige brand in disguise, one that happened to be hiding inside the most anonymous industry imaginable. Here is what makes artificial teeth the perfect product, and why almost no one who has not studied it understands how remarkable the economics actually are. A full set of ceramic dental prosthetics weighs almost nothing. You could ship a month's worth of product from a single Alpine factory to the other side of the world for the cost of a business-class plane ticket. The margins are extraordinary. The raw materials, primarily feldspar, silica, and various metallic oxides, are globally abundant and cheap. The value is entirely in the craftsmanship, the formulation, and most importantly, the trust. Dentists do not switch suppliers casually. When a clinician finds a ceramic system that their technicians know how to work with, that their patients tolerate well, and that holds up over years of use, they stay with it. The switching cost is not financial, it is reputational. No dentist wants to tell a patient that the crown that cracked after 18 months was an experiment with a new vendor. This creates a product with one of the most durable customer retention profiles in any manufacturing industry on earth. And then there is the recession-proof quality that every smart investor spends their career looking for. Teeth do not care about interest rates. When the global economy collapses, people still lose teeth. They still need replacements. Cosmetic dentistry might slow slightly in a downturn, but prosthetic dentistry, the clinical, functional, medically necessary kind, barely flinches. Ivoirclar understood this before most of the business world had a vocabulary for it. By the 1960s, they had subsidiaries in Germany, France, Italy, and Austria. By the late 1970s, they were in the United States, Canada, and Australia. They were not chasing trends. They were quietly installing themselves as the default infrastructure of global dental care, one ceramic tooth at a time. While Ivoirclar was busy building a physical empire one prosthetic at a time, the government of Liechtenstein was running a completely parallel play. The principality had something that most people do not think of as an asset, but is actually one of the most powerful levers in geopolitics: sovereignty. A tiny country can write its own laws, and if those laws happen to be extraordinarily attractive to corporations from larger countries that prefer their tax burdens to be theoretical rather than actual, well, that is simply the free market expressing itself. Liechtenstein rewrote its corporate structure laws in a way that made the principality a magnet for holding companies and private foundations. The annual fee to maintain a registered shell entity was extraordinarily low, around 1,000 Swiss francs per year. At its peak, Liechtenstein had approximately 73,000 registered holding companies within its borders. Its population at the same time was roughly 35,000 people. There were more phantom corporations than there were living human beings. Swiss banks were ordering these entities by the dozen through Liechtenstein fiduciaries, lawyers who could bring a company into legal existence with nothing more than a rubber stamp and a signature. The revenue from this alone was generating tens of millions of francs annually for the state. The arrangement was elegant in its simplicity. Liechtenstein offered the wealthy of Europe, and eventually the wealthy of the entire world, a perfectly legal way to separate their assets from the jurisdictions that wanted to tax them. And because tax evasion was not even a criminal offence under Liechtenstein law, the Principality's own ambassador to Germany once compared it to a minor traffic violation. The dual economy was now fully operational, physical teeth flowing out of Schaan by the millions, phantom money flowing in from every major economy in Europe. The Principality was running two completely different businesses simultaneously, and both were growing. The breakthrough that turned Ivoclar from a dominant industrial supplier into something resembling a cultural institution came in 2005 with the launch of a product called IPSE.Max. It was a lithium disilicate glass ceramic. That description tells you nothing about why it mattered, so here is the version that actually lands. Dentists and cosmetic surgeons had spent decades searching for a material that looked genuinely indistinguishable from natural tooth enamel, that could withstand the mechanical forces of a human jaw and that would not discolour or degrade over years of coffee, red wine, and the general abuse that mouths inflict on everything placed inside them. IPSE.Max was that material. It became the gold standard for veneers and crowns in high-end cosmetic dentistry almost immediately. And high-end cosmetic dentistry, particularly in the United States, is driven by a very specific demographic: actors, musicians, television personalities, executives, athletes, the people who appear on screens and stages and whose smiles are professionally scrutinized and commercially valued. When the preferred material in Beverly Hills dental practices and Manhattan cosmetic clinics is manufactured in a valley in Liechtenstein, you have achieved something that no marketing budget can replicate. You've become invisible infrastructure for a visible industry. Nobody is walking a red carpet and crediting the factory in Shan, but the factory in Shan is in their mouth. By the mid-2000s, Ivoclar's products were in use across 30 countries through its own subsidiaries and were being distributed in over 100 more. The monopoly was not announced. It was assumed. In 2008, the Wolves came in. A former employee of LGT Bank in Liechtenstein, a man named Heinrich Kieber, walked out of the principality with a CD containing the names of approximately 1,400 account holders from around the world. He sold this data to the German intelligence service for somewhere between $6 and $7 million. German tax authorities immediately executed search warrants across the country. A prominent German businessman was arrested. Within days, the governments of the United Kingdom, Italy, France, Spain, Canada, Australia, and the United States had all announced parallel investigations. The US Senate Subcommittee on Investigations concluded that offshore tax havens, with Liechtenstein and Switzerland explicitly named, were costing the American Treasury roughly $100 billion per year. The principality was not just under pressure, it was facing a coordinated international siege. The OECD had already listed Liechtenstein as an uncooperative tax haven back in 2000. Now that designation had teeth. Germany proposed forcing the entire bloc of European secrecy jurisdictions to share financial data with neighbouring governments. One senior European banking executive publicly called the Liechtenstein investigation an earthquake for private banking. The country of 35,000 people had somehow managed to anger Germany, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union simultaneously. Financial services at this point accounted for 20% of Liechtenstein's GDP. The phantom economy was not peripheral, it was structural, and it was now under direct attack from the most powerful regulatory forces on the planet. This is where the teeth saved the country, not metaphorically, literally. When the international community came for Liechtenstein's banking sector, the principality had something that almost no other comparably sized tax haven possessed: a real, physical, globally dominant manufacturing economy that had absolutely nothing to do with secrecy or offshore structures. Ivoclar was generating hundreds of millions of Swiss francs in legitimate, auditable, exportable revenue. It employed thousands of people across multiple continents. It had subsidiaries in 30 countries. Its products were shipped from Shan to 130 nations. This was not a shell. This was an actual company making an actual product that actual dentists actually needed. When Liechtenstein signed what became known as the Liechtenstein Declaration in March 2009, pledging to adopt OECD transparency standards and cooperate on tax information exchange, it was not starting from zero. It was negotiating from a position of legitimate economic substance. In 2010, the government paid a €50 million fine to Germany and formally closed that chapter. The banking reforms were painful. One estimate suggested roughly a third of the phantom corporate clients simply left, dispersing to Malta, Cyprus, and eventually Panama. Another third legalized their structures. Tax authorities caught a third. The revenue from holding company fees, which had been generating around 90 million Swiss francs annually, largely evaporated, but the principality was not hollowed out, because behind the curtain of financial engineering there had always been a factory, and the factory never stopped running. The lesson embedded in all of this is one that business schools teach in theory, but almost never illustrate with a compelling real-world case. Extreme specialization in a physical niche is a more durable competitive position than almost any other strategy available to a small player. Tech is glamorous, but it attracts capital, competition, and disruption at a pace that is genuinely brutal. Oil is lucrative, but it is geopolitically exposed, environmentally contested, and subject to demand curves that no single producer can control. Artificial teeth made in a specific alpine valley, using a century of accumulated ceramic expertise, refined through decades of investment in research and development, trusted by dental professionals on every continent, distributed through a global subsidiary network that took 60 years to build. That is something different. That is a moat, not a moat because no one else tried to compete. Companies in Germany, Japan, and the United States have all made serious attempts to challenge Ivoclar across various product segments, but the combination of technical precision, professional trust, regulatory certification, and sheer institutional knowledge that Ivoclar has built since 1923 is extraordinarily difficult to replicate quickly. The factory in Schaan operates one of the largest dental research and development centers in the world. The product pipeline is not static. It has been continuously evolving for a century. When you own a niche that deeply and that long, you are not just selling a product, you are the category. And being the category is, commercially speaking, almost impossible to dislodge. Today, Liechtenstein sits at a GDP per capita of over $200,000, making it one of the wealthiest countries on the planet by that measure. Its only billionaire, Christoph Zeller, the grandson of the man who renamed and rebuilt Ivoclar after the war, was last estimated by Forbes to be worth over $3 billion, a figure representing roughly half of the entire nation's GDP at the time. Ivoclar reported revenues of approximately 856 million Swiss francs in 2023, shipping product from Schaan to 130 countries, with subsidiaries in 30 nations and a workforce of around 3,600 people globally. The principality itself has largely completed its transition from shadowy tax haven to legitimate, transparent financial centre, having signed tax cooperation agreements with dozens of countries and formally abolishing banking secrecy in 2017. The phantom corporations are mostly gone, the teeth remain, and that is the entire story really. A royal family that sold its art to survive, a ceramics company that found a forgotten valley and decided to make it home, a product so boring, so functional, so medically necessary that it quietly conquered the world while no one was paying attention. The lesson for anyone building something today is not complicated. You do not need to be the most exciting company in the room. You do not need to be in a sexy industry. You do not need to make something people want to talk about at dinner parties. You need to make something people cannot do without. Build that in one specific place, better than anyone else on earth, for long enough. The rest tends to take care of itself. If this story taught you anything, let it be this. The most powerful businesses in history were rarely the loudest ones in the room. They were the ones that found a problem nobody thought was worth solving, and solved it better than anyone else, for longer than anyone else was willing to try. If you want more stories like this, ones about forgotten industries, overlooked places, and the counterintuitive strategies that built some of the most durable empires on Earth, subscribe. There is a new one every week, and if you know someone who is building something right now and needs a reminder that unglamorous is not the same as unwinnable, send this to them. It might be the most useful thing they watch all year.